Do you like books? I mean, really, really like books? Then you're in the right place. Each week, your host, Sam Hankin, interviews the best of today's top selling authors and the up and coming superstars of modern literature. This is The Avid Reader. Here is your host, Sam Hankin.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of The Avid Reader, brought to you by Wellington Square Bookshop. Our guests today are Michaela Vieser and Isaac Yuen, authors of The Sound Atlas, which is a guide to strange sounds across landscapes and imagination. It's published by Reaction, one of my favorite presses. It'll be released in November, which seems far away, but it'll happen really quickly. Michaela is the author of 10 books, including the bestseller Tea with Buddha. She publishes narrative works in many periodicals and papers. Isaac's short fiction and creative nonfiction can be found in many publications, including the Pushcart Prize Anthology and Tin House, two of my favorite publications. His debut nature essay collection was titled Earth, Advice on Living in a More Than Human World. The Sturgeon's Dream, a libretto, was also co-authored by the pair. So, the poet Thomas Browne wrote that sound, whilst it is sounding, is but the motion of air, and when it is past, is nothing. And I'm not so sure that I believe that, as sequoia trees stand tall and have since the beginning of the Christian era, the rustling of their leaves is ephemeral, yet it's kind of with us every day. And as for the memory of sound, I'm not sure either. I can recall vividly of skipping a stone across a frozen pond and the liminal sound that the pond stayed frozen for months. The sound lasted for a second, yet it still remains with me. I can sing in my mind, "Give Me Shelter" by the Rolling Stones and hear every word and tone. And unfortunately, I can do the same thing with the Baby Shark song, which I don't want to do. So our authors indulge us in the book in allowing us to go through section by section at random, which is fun, or you can read it as a whole from beginning to end. So from sounds of the earth to sounds from the deepest mankind has gone, from the numerous bellows of whales across thousands of miles to the silence of an anechoic chamber, we're taken on a journey that extends through songs played on stalagmites to the sounds of dinosaurs, to the music ready to be played on the Voyager as it cruises billions of miles from Earth. So let's discuss with Michaela and Isaac the strange and wondrous of the now of sound and how it travels from landscape to imagination. Welcome to both of you, and thanks so much for joining us.
Well, this is the most beautiful introduction I think our book has ever gotten, and it seems like you're a true listener. I could just hear the joy of your listening experience to the world. It's wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having us. I mean, like all the little personal experiences that you just mentioned, like these were the things that when we were talking to friends, the sound experiences are what some of their strongest memories are, like it's not sort of visual memory, it's what they were hearing at the time. And that's surprising to them as well. So that's really nice to hear you say that too.
It's so evocative. It's kind of like smell. Like when I was a kid, I still remember the smell of burning leaves. Well, the smell is gone. I can still see the trees from which the leaves came from, but the smell is gone. Yet if I hear it again, it brings back memories of Halloween and walking to school,
Sure.
So since the Atlas goes from sound to sound and place to place, I guess that's the way we'll do the interview. And I always jump from thing to thing anyway. So I was thinking first we could talk about, let's go with this sand and Marco Polo and talk about that, because some of these, I don't think people really understand because they've never experienced it. And they don't know why round grains of silica could create a sound in the first place.
Yeah. So we sort of split up sort of the research and the writing of the stories between us two. So Singing Sands is the one I researched and explored. So that was really one of my more enjoyable ones. I think it for that particular story, it's about sort of these places in the world that have these sand dunes that resonate in some way, and they seem like they're singing. And the account of Marco Polo going to the Lop Desert, and he's, describing it in his adventures of ghosts in the night, like places where there's just like, it sounds like someone is, like there in the sands. And so I was really curious as to the phenomenon of why does this work? And so part of the research of the book that's always interesting is trying to see if the story behind the sounds is worth telling. And this particular story had a lot of interesting nuances. Of course, the literature or the literary travel sort of evocative romanticism of, deserts and faraway landscapes and strange sounds from these landscapes. As well as the more I research, there's also other accounts of other people encountering these phenomenon around the world, especially with scientists who are really interested in investigating the why. How do these grains like resonate and find a sound? And they discover, and the experiments that they do in these spaces are really interesting because they're also having fun. They're rolling down the hill and then recording it and seeing why something happens, and certain sands resonate more or in a different frequency than others. And then they take the sand back to the lab and then try to sort of replicate it. And they discover that, certain sands, when they tumble across, the grain sizes tumble with each other, produces harmonics. And it really depends on the consistency of the sand, the size of the grains, and these sorts of factors that lead to a really pure singing sand, pure, versus a more sort of multitudinous, almost like a cacophony of sounds in these landscapes where I think a couple of the stories in the collection are really, I wanted to see, sounds that are produced by non-human forces. So there's another one with the Aeolian harp, where it's the wind that's playing music without human hands or playing sounds without human hands. And so the singing sands is also a really interesting exploration into one of these journeys. Plus, it has an atlas component to it because there's, all these different spaces around the globe that really have this phenomenon. So I thought that there was enough there to provide an interesting anecdote and connect a lot of dots, which is something we do a lot in the book.
One thing that was interesting when you talked about them sliding down the hill and the sand dune having fun is almost every, you made me work hard because almost every story I had to go to YouTube. And so I saw them sliding down the hill.
Sure.
I saw them playing the stalagmites. I saw the Aeolian, heard, but I saw as well. So every single thing, I went down the rabbit hole of having my iPad next to the book on the book and then going directly to YouTube on each one, which was really informative, actually, especially the Aeolian harp. I had no idea. I thought of something that was strange. I thought, what would a deaf person experience reading this book? What do you think, Michaela?
It's an interesting question, definitely. But I mean, one thing is sound is something that we feel with our entire body, you know. I mean, of course, we hear sound in ears, but it's a very mechanical process how we hear. But sounds, because it's waves, they also enter our body and and really penetrate our body, and we have certain hollow places in the body that start to vibrate when we hear sound. So I'm sure that certain sounds deaf people can hear too. And there's one chapter about the organ in there, where there's in Germany, we call it a Demutspfeife, a humility pipe. And there used to be something in German churches. It was, you would play two very deep organ pipes together, and they would create a sound that is so deep you cannot hear it, but you feel it. And it gives you this feeling of being very close to God or awe. And Bach, the composer, he called it Erdenschwere, which means the heaviness and weight of the earth, and he wanted to transport it. But again, it's a sound you cannot hear, but it's so strong that, yeah, like you have this feeling of being with another entity, and they would play it, so the story goes, just when people were supposed to give money, the almosen, to give money to the church, just in that moment. And that is something people don't even know they're hearing it, but they're feeling it. That is one part. But the other part is we kind of wrote this book almost like a book that you would write about food, where you don't have to taste the food, but maybe it really makes you want to, first of all, it makes you want to explore the taste, and you wonder what are the stories hidden in certain types of food, that are being cooked. And the same way we're trying to describe sounds and the whole story around them, which was a very interesting process that I think Isaac would also like to talk a bit about. How do you write about sound? How do you write about something as ephemeral, a sound that is released, hits you, and something happens within you, but what else is there to tell? And I think this is the attempt of the book. What is there to tell about sounds? Maybe you take over, Isaac.
Yeah. I think one of the challenges we set for ourselves is that it would be very easy and to sort of always link a physical, playing of a sound with the story. And as writers, we're interested in evoking, the sensation of the sound or the story behind the sound. Sometimes the sounds aren't so interesting themselves. It's, a lot of times if you have no context, it's really just noise, or it's just something that you go, oh, okay, that's interesting. We're not really writing about music in most cases, or things that are super catchy. So it's like, how do we convey the history, the story, the aesthetics, the curiosity behind the discovery and the history of these sounds in words and through storytelling, without having, you don't need the sound to hear it. But like you, I think it's interesting that it opens a portal for your curiosity to go, I wonder what that sounds like. I wonder what this story is fitted towards the sound. And then you can sort of explore and go into this parallel world of sound. We always say that, that always exists around us, beside our very visual centric world. And, like just a little peek, just a little, taste inwards, to get you to pay attention and listen to things that might not capture your attention on sort of a day-to-day basis.
I'm glad you mentioned the organ, Michaela, because it was so important to me in the book. You know, I'm lucky enough to be near the Wanamaker organ in Philadelphia, which is
Oh, yeah.
yeah, and they just closed the Wanamaker, but they're going to retain the organ, and they still have concerts on Saturday. I can stay in a church if the organ's playing for 6 hours. We went to where was it? Siena in Italy. There's a little church there. Everyone else went out on the tour, and they lost me because I didn't see anything. I just stayed in the church because, as you said, it's awe-inspiring. And then I thought of, the Atlantic City organ. I've also taken a tour of that because I'm, 2 hours away.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, as you say, some things you just can't explain in words. It's because if a deaf person was there, they can quote unquote hear it. And I was thinking of, the other thing, one of my favorite books is Gödel Escher Bach, An Eternal Golden Braid by Douglas Hofstadter, who has a new book out, by the way. But, and the concept of the fugue and the concept of recursion and self-reference. So then I went to YouTube and looked up fractals, and they have sound fractals, which is like, it just blows my mind because I couldn't even comprehend what they were talking about. And then, so to ask a question instead of just going on and on, talk about the organ that's like going to last for 2 or 3 centuries, and the fact that they have the sandbags on the pedals and the note is so low. And then the people who've bought the first century and the end, but they don't buy the middle because it's boring.
Yeah, that's the As Slow as Possible piece by
Yes.
Kate.
Well,
Yeah. And which they calculated to last as long as one of the oldest organ that has been in play has lasted. So they thought, okay, to play it as slow as possible would have to be the lifespan of an organ, and that's where they built it. And it takes, I think the piece started with a pause, and the pause lasted 1.5 years, and then they started playing with the first tone, and but I went there. It's a very austere place. It really does something to you to stand in a sound that will last for 600 plus years, and in a church that is not really a church anymore. It's been used as a pig stall and everything over the centuries, but there is something sacred about it, I'd say. Just the, interestingly, the person who set this all up is someone who is a professor in administration, because you do have to really work it out. How do you make something play for 600 plus years? How do you get it financed? How do you ensure that this project will really last? So it's really a wedding between administration, sound, and a really far out idea.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. Mm.
I mean, I think it was in the chapter, maybe not, but how does the concept of the fugue in Hofstadter's book, what's very accessible is the idea he's talking about Kurt Gödel, who wrote the theory of incompleteness, and Escher, whose self-referential etchings imply the same thing as the fugue, self-referential and recursive. How does that play into your concept of sound? Since you guys brought it up, you did mention it.
Isaac, do you want to answer it? I think I have a problem with understanding the word you used, the fugue.
Yeah, the fugue.
Huh?
The Bach, like so, and the well-tempered clavier, it's like,
oh, the fugue. Okay.
Yeah. So
Sorry.
it's the motifs like the fractal, repeat, but they're repeating themselves. I can't explain it. One of you explain it.
Oh, I can. Do you want to answer, Isaac, or shall I?
I think it's the one that you wrote.
Yeah. Well, no,
Yeah.
I was just gonna say that we just had an amazing encounter with Professor Barry Truax from actually the Simon Fraser University, who first studied radio astronomy and then went on, and that was in the very early 70s, maybe even 60s. He went on to study computer music. And he came up with this idea of quantum sound. So with his computer, he's able to take a soundscape and then go to the last level of sound, just really go to where there's only one wave left. And it's just an encapsulated wave, like a grain of sand almost. And then he rounds the corners so it becomes more applicable, and then he starts playing with it. And so he's got these droplets of sound, really the most minimum you can imagine, and he starts playing with it. And the first piece he wrote is called River Run, and it becomes, we were listening to it in his basement. Honestly, it was an experience that was, I was shaken for like 3 days after listening to it, because it evoked something, and something happens where it's you start hearing harmonies, you start hearing something that cannot possibly be there, but it really, it's there. So I don't know. I mean, what sound is physics, and there is a mathematical concept behind it. And Bach, we all know, was fantastic in replicating that and playing with it. To me, it's a mystery, and for me, it's fine to keep it a mystery. I don't have to decode everything. It almost has a shamanic quality, and as we all know, music is able to elevate us to even, I would say, physical and bodily states that are just beyond the normal. And there's something about sound that can do that. Yeah.
I like the way you still have this incredible passion towards it, and the idea that the mystery does not need to be solved, which it's, and so River Run, that's the second reference in your book to Finnegan's Wake, by the way.
Yes.
Um, so which reminds me, when you talk about these evocative sounds and reducing them to their basic level, you talk about Watson and Crick, and they think it's pigeons, they don't know what it is, and then they realize this is a uniform sound that comes from everywhere and is always going to be there because it's whatever 4 degrees above Kelvin and just is constantly going to be inundated. And you compare it to the idea, okay, you can find it, just an old-fashioned TV better than a new one, obviously. You can hear the static. So explain to our listeners why we can hear the beginning of the universe.
Yeah, so this is like one of the first stories in the book, really. It has to do with sort of the origins of the universe and these two radio astronomers that was really just working and doing their work and fine-tuning this new horn antenna in New Jersey. And they were starting to pick up this sort of static that they couldn't explain. At first, they thought it was just like some pigeons that was, interfering with the telescope. And so they were like, cleaning it out. And then they consulted with other physicists and then discovered, hey, this is pervasive. This is something that, permeates sort of all of the Earth, all of us, like this residual wake of energy that's just all around the universe. And basically they discovered this particular phenomenon called the cosmic background microwave radiation. And that basically provided the proof for the Big Bang theory. It's this sort of residual wake that's still, flooding us 14 plus billion years, 13.7 billion years later. It's still sort of with us. And this idea of the static that we can still pick up is really interesting to me because it's like, it's something that's tangible, that's sort of, it's still, we can still detect it with very analog equipment. The radio or the TV with the rabbit ears. That's still sort of something that is coming in from the universe. What we think is static is just the background of everything. And so this idea of that we being able to tune into something so primordial is very evocative, as well as there's other sort of, like we said, sound really is energy, waves of energy coming to us. And there are always these really big waves that are coming at us all the time, gravity waves that we can't really detect with our sensory organs, but like because we're quite clever, we're able to devise, instrumentation and things that can detect them. And then through the process of sonification, which is, like to convert energy into something that we can hear, then we can actually sort of grasp and comprehend these sorts of phenomenon that are outside our limited, very limited human perception range. And I find that super fascinating. There's a couple of stories in the book about, what does it mean to listen beyond our own perception? Like there are creatures that operate at different wavelengths, literally, in terms of their um, it being able to receive or transmit sounds. And so the universe also is operating at these like really vast frequencies that we're not able to detect unless we sort of squeeze it down and make it sort of audible and tangible to us. And that's always an interesting experience in terms of how to capture that information in something that becomes interesting and relevant to us.
Yeah, that reminds me of a lot of things, which I have. That's why when I look down, I'm not bored. I'm writing down things as fast as I can, because otherwise, at my age, I'll forget them immediately. But when you said sonification, it reminds me of, and I always had doubts about this, and you can assuage my doubts. like when you talk about sonification of the pillars of creation, or of the Crab Nebula, or the idea of creating what I can kind of understand it would be the sound of a supernova or something like that. Talk about how that's done, because it always reminds me of the pictures where they the colorization of the Crab Nebula, because the telescope isn't perceiving that color, but there's a husband and wife team that do most of the
A lot of
colorization.
those are, yeah, a lot of those are transforming or converting sort of energy wavelengths into signals that that fit within our audible range. So to be fair, they are not real. They're, you know, like it's almost like a conversion of something that is beyond us. How do we perceive, comprehend, grapple with something that our senses cannot fathom? Like it's just, there's no way. So sonification is a way to do that, but it is a caveat always in that it's not the real thing, but it does preserve some quality that makes it interesting. You know, like in terms of one of the things about the harmony of the spheres, where there was a group in Toronto, a musical group in Toronto, that tries to capture the movements of planets into a sonified sort of experience. And they use the frequency of the orbits to do that. And so obviously the planets themselves orbiting aren't making the sound, but the frequency of them making that sound as they go across is interesting, because it does tell us, you know, perceptions about ratios, harmonics, and there's these things that link back to also old ideas of there's harmony in the heavens and music in the heavens, and how do we sort of play around with reimagining, I guess, those old stories through new technology and new knowledge. So I would say sonification is a tool. It doesn't generally describe, you know, it's not like they're actually singing, you know, or they're actually, you know, like making these sounds, but it's a way to sort of detect the phenomenon and then convert it to highlight it for our senses as human beings.
Yeah, and I've always felt, if not heard, even when I read the ancient Greeks and talked about the music and the harmony of the spheres, I always kind of understood it. Could I explain it to you? No, but I kind of understood it. And then I thought of it as a kind of translation. And then it reminded me of Michaela's book, Tea with Buddha, because I went to Amazon because I wanted to read it, but I can't find it because it's not been translated as best I can find. So I'm thinking it's the same thing. If it's translated, then I can comprehend it. But until it's translated, I can't hear it. Right?
Yeah.
So
I mean, it was interesting because when we were writing the book, just then Ed Yong's fantastic book, An Immense World, came out. And he talks about, you know, how we could all be in a room with animals, that everyone has a different sense. And so we are perceiving the room in a very different way. It's just not the same room. The reality is completely different, but it's the one reality, but we perceive it different. And to us, sound was almost like a portal into a world that always is here right with us, but that our sensors are not out to capture it. And I think it might have been different in ancient days, but our modern time and age, we're so focused on the visual world. You know, everything we do is on the computer. Now, the last 10 years have been crazy. Even Tommy Go, he's a interaction designer from New York. He made this representation of how the computer perceives us, and it's a giant eye and one big finger, you know, because that's how we navigate this whole, you know, cyberspace, whatever. Like everything is so visual, and then the one finger, and sound is just, yeah, by focusing on sound, we are realizing there's much more out there. There's so many nuances, and we can learn so much. And especially because in order to hear sound, we have to listen. And the act of listening is an introspective act. It really makes us go quiet first. It's like we we become humble. If we really want to listen, we have to become humble and take ourselves back. And yeah, so I think that was one thing that the longer we wrote on the book, it just, yeah, we realized this book is actually some sort of meditation on the world. Um, I think I think it's okay to say it as a writer. I hope it doesn't sound too, yeah, too blasting out. But it was but it was a really personal experience. This, yeah, to listen is something very humble. Yeah.
There were so many things that resonated with me because I thought of something and then you wrote about it. Like when you mentioned Hermann Hesse and Magister Ludi, one of my favorite books, which The Glass Bead Game. And so when I was in college, I mean, I loved Hesse and I read every single book. And so I was in college, my German professor, I said, so is this a good translation of the book? And he goes, why would I read the translation? He was really mean. He said it in a mean way. He was condescending about it. But it's true. I mean, I don't know if you translated Tea with Buddha. Is that the book you wrote? I have no idea.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's but I never translated. No, it's
I wish you would.
yeah, I should. I
Really
should. Yeah.
And then like, you know, I thought about sounds. I was thinking about mellifluous and cacophonous. And I was thinking about when you talked about sonic canon. And I remember when we were in Nicaragua, and who was the guy? They called him Pineapple Head. I remember that. Who was whoever the guy was the head of Nicaragua. And we got him out of his house by doing the sonic canon, like continuously playing some song that was horrible at 110 decibels. And I thought we'll talk about how that sonic canon works and how it's designed for military purposes.
Well, that whole chapter, it's on sound manipulation, how you can use sound as a weapon. And we're both in Berlin, and Isaac lives right next to Tempelhofer Feld, which is the old airport. But before it was an airport even, it was a big field where Hitler had some of the first mass rallies. And the reason why these rallies worked is because he put up these huge sound speakers. They were just being invented and they were massive. And so his voice, more than anything, was just like, blasting over the field. Everyone could hear it. And from then on, the Nazis were like, oh, loud speech actually works. A good fashion, it's a real fascist realization. And I mean, I remember, I think it was my grandfather actually who told me, I just wish they wouldn't always yell all the time. He was like, they always yelled, and the loudspeakers just made it louder, But so from that, in that chapter, we jump a bit to different stories about sound manipulation. One was also about an American army that went to Western Germany during the war, and they had recorded lots of sounds of tanks rolling in and bombs blasting, and they played it, and the German soldiers heard that and were afraid and gave up and ran away. And then so this whole development then goes on and further to these sound guns, and it's actually in my hometown which is in the Black Forest, where we have an institute where these kind of machines were invented. So is the saying, but it was so secret that it became kind of a myth. But well, they work by playing a sound that when you stand in it, you lose all your sense of understanding. There is nothing more than you want to run away. You want to get away. You want to get out of this sound shower. It's so intense. I only had it happen to me once. I was in the Altai Mountains, and I was camping next to a lake, and the next morning when I woke up, there was this wind that was just blasting over the lake onto my tent and onto where I was standing and trying to make my coffee. And the wind was howling so loud, I could not think straight. You know, it was really, I had to every second I had to just focus on, I'm here now, I'm present. This is just wind. This is only wind, you know, but it was really hard to deal. And this is how these sound cannons work. And they're now employed by various nations. I think at the last Trump inauguration, the first Trump inauguration, it was used to disperse
women, the Women's
demonstrants.
March
Yeah.
of all
And,
things.
and
that
they are,
reminds me, when you said Black Forest, it reminds me of the chapter that talks about, just because it's the forest, about the absence of sound versus silence. And like the anechoic chambers where it's minus 13 decibels, but we can't hear below 0 decibels anyway. And then the idea of silence as opposed to the absence of sound. And that was interesting because I'm thinking, okay, it's a book about sound. Here's a chapter about no sound. So who did that one?
it's Isaac.
I think as we wrote along, I was like, this needs to be a keystone chapter. This must be in the book. For a book about sound, it has to have its opposite, has to have a contrasting something. And the more, we researched into, this notion of silence, there are just so many people doing interesting things and really, really wanting to explore the concept and the notion of silence in all the different facets. And this idea in the modern world of noise pollution being a seriously health risk, and dealing a lot of damages, because people sound, again, energy, in all the ways. It's not just active like damage, or directed weapons, of sonic weapons, but it's like just the constant drone of modern day life, like, and it's high decibels, stress, and like all these things where it's just like it builds in your system. And so this idea of going to these spaces that are devoid of sound, but not actually. Some of them are completely devoid, like the anechoic chambers, where they try to get it as soundproof as possible, basically, by having these walls that are designed to eat the sound, so nothing would come back to your ears. So the body also has a very interesting reaction in these cases, where the senses don't know what to do, because we are so used to a background level of sound, or sensory information coming in. When that stops, like it really sort of, the body is just a little bit disoriented. There's all these, I guess, like, sayings and memes saying, oh, if you spend like 45 minutes in this anechoic chamber, you'll go crazy. That's not really true. It's more of a marketing thing, but people do find the experience quite unsettling a lot of the times. This idea of, silence is always a good thing and we need more of it, but like maybe too much silence, complete, deprivation is not something that actually is a good thing for us either. So I think the chapter on silence was, it acts as a couple of things in sort of a literary project like ours. It's like, it's kind of like a little interlude, I guess. For the rest of the book, it's playing with all these things, and then it sort of stops, and then it has this little pause. We have another chapter, I guess, in the book. It's actually about interludes as well, but those ones are sort of in between sounds. The interludes of sounds. But this one is more. This chapter was more dealing with the absence of sound, and in both natural and sort of man-made settings. And that was really, yeah, like I said, I think it's just something that I felt really strongly about in putting it in there. Out of all the chapters, I think it was just one that I felt was necessary. out of everything.
I remember there's a lady who I interviewed her, wrote a book about the spaces between sounds and songs, like the Beach Boys' Good Vibrations. There's a space at the end that makes the song, and that's just Brian Wilson's genius. And yeah, so it's, and like you said about the cathedral, where the first year and a half was a pause. But then that reminded me, I went all over the place. We just came back from Switzerland, where they kept giving me Ricola cough drops, which reminded me of the Alpine horn.
Alp horns. Yeah.
And then the funniest thing about that chapter was the way basically you ended up saying they were for communication with cows.
Yeah, I met this artist who actually plays it to the cows, and they really like it. But I was going to say about these interludes, there is I studied Japanese language and history of art, and there is a concept in Japanese art which is called ma, which is a space which you would just put in to make everything around stand out more. It's this one space is important. In that way, the silence chapter, which interesting, like a lot of the some of the places which feel silent aren't really silent. There's something going on, but it's on such a fine and chosen level. And
so the hum is a good one.
Yeah, no, not the hum, but I'm going more because you mentioned the Timid Buddha book, which actually I read because I wrote the Timid Buddha. It's about my experience in a Japanese monastery where I lived when I was 23 for a year. I lived there, and it was there where I would say I had the most beautiful sound experience ever, which might have been the Japanese tea room, which is a place where there's no sound really, but the sound that there is just the steam of the teapot, of the kettle. And maybe the sounds, although they're always trying to not make sound, of the tea master just picking up, the tools and rubbing them and putting the tea cup in front of you. Just these very muted sounds in this otherwise very empty of noise room. Yeah, and then once you leave that room again, the world slowly, of course you're kind of high from that really strong tea you were drinking, but then you leave that tea room again and the world suddenly comes to you almost like, yeah, it's funny how it does that. But I was just going to say that about the space and sounds, and
it's almost a reset, for your senses.
Yeah, it always again these things resonate with me because I always think of the paintings of Mount Fuji in Japan, but they always, in the very tiny part, there's a little tiny person. They always put a person in just to show you that we essentially are meaningless. Without the person, you can't recognize the massiveness of the. Oh, and then you talk about icebergs too, and then I looked at YouTube's of icebergs for 2 hours. You kept me up all night. It was horrible. But then the other thing is, on a much more macabre basis, you do that chapter, which I never would have thought of the sounds in the morgue and the crematory. Which of you? I bet you Isaac read that one.
That was a fun night. No, it was Michaela. Yeah, but we were both there. I love the chapter actually because you set the tone. I was there, and like this dark night, we're wheeling our luggage, and going through the streets of Copenhagen, and like arriving later at your friend's place, and then just listening to this record he puts on in this dark, apartment, of the sounds, the records of death, like all the different sort of variations of it. Sorry.
With his little son in the room next door.
He was sleeping. It's fine.
But the crematory and the slight. Oh yeah, it's. But
It,
it just shows you that those things, you could be blind and you would still have that same understanding of what was going on. But I have no idea why or how. There's so many of these things in the books that in our interview we really can't express, which is strange.
mm, I mean, this is, yeah, I mean, but this is Jakob Kierkegaard, the artist. He, even though he did these recordings, full recordings of death, one in a morgue, one with sensors on a what do you call it, where you
A
burn,
body field.
no, not the body field,
Oh,
where you burn people, the
the crematorium.
crematorium, yeah,
Mhm.
crematorium. Then the body fields, which is an experimental space in Texas where you put dead bodies in a field and see how they decompose for forensic
Oh yeah,
research.
yeah.
And then
Mhm.
you
Heard about that.
so he would put his microphone into the carcasses and you would just hear, the munching of the insects. It's just so loud, so full of life. And the fourth recording is at an autopsy where he, you can hear the precise opening of the skull. You can hear the skin being pulled away, being the brain being taken out, and that certain kind of plop it does when you put
Wait.
on the weight of it. And he was explaining to us how we didn't listen to the liver, we only listened to the brain, but how that is a very different
Difference.
sound,
Yeah, I can imagine.
um, and Jakob was saying, this piece is a meditation on life. It's not about death, it's about life. And yeah, I think sound can take you there.
I love the fact that his name was Kierkegaard, because as Soren Kierkegaard said that one can deceive oneself about everything except death. And
Mm,
then he's
It's very true.
explicating what that actually means, you know. And I interviewed another guy who was talking about sound, and he put microphones in the earth, and then he put
mhm,
microphones in the dirt where big agricultural companies grow things, but they just grow them by putting chemicals on top of the dirt. So in
Mhm.
the earth, there was all this sound from earthworms crawling through to all kinds of things. But when he laid it in the dirt, it was
Nothing.
complete silence.
mm,
Yeah, that's like the idea of listening to the world is something that we didn't do one on the soil. That would have been very interesting, I think, to put microphones in the soil. But we did do a chapter on the sea, and listening to the sea and how, like the various types of sounds in the sea, both positive and negative, I guess. Human generated or natural sounds. The ocean is not silent. The ocean is full of sounds, and it's vital because water is such a good conductor for sound that life communicates so much, so unexpectedly much in the seas through sound. Like fish are super noisy, like lobsters are really noisy. Like all these things we only recently have tuned into, really, and that's because perhaps of human hubris or technology is just getting a bit more accessible where we're able to actually realize, hey, this is a happening place down here. And and we have basically inadvertently polluted and sort of scrambled all these signals through, our cargo ships and our, like our prospecting for oil and gas and all these things we use sound for to blast the oceans are really affecting, the communication networks of life in the ocean. And one of the examples we went to, we traveled to the Baltic Sea, and this area where the sea itself is one of the more polluted spaces in on Earth in terms of a body of water because it's so shallow and there's so much activity around it. And this idea, we dropped the microphone in and like a hydrophone and tried to listen. We First off, we also did a listening of the ferries that went by off the shores of Ireland, which is an island in the middle of the Baltic, and the ferries would go by every, I think at noon there were four ferries like all simultaneously in a row, and it's just the noise from the propellers were just like really deafening. And then so at the same time we put, you know, a hydrophone into a place where there was a lot of sort of algae bloom. And basically algae bloom is very good at absorbing sound. And there wasn't really anything left to capture. Like there was not really, it was very quiet, but like an eerie kind of quiet, unfortunately. So this
Yeah, it's
idea.
when you talk about, well, first of all, you used to say that Mars has been mapped more than our ocean depths. And then you talk about the Challenger Deep and the pressure on the capsule that's going down to the bottom. But then, which led me to even there, the concept of what I said in the introduction about whales and 11,000 miles. And, you know, what are they actually chatting about? You know, chatting about, hey, this is the way the ocean looks like over here, just in case you come by. Oh, there she, where did she
Oh,
go?
oh, I think she popped
We
out.
can stop until I'll write
Sure.
down the time.
The time code. Oh,
We're at
must be a signal thing.
50. I can't read anything without, where's my
Glasses. D4 now. Just check.
It's funny because like a couple minutes ago, my dog started barking. I'm thinking, my dog is barking. The sound of the dog in the interview is going to be horrible. And
No, I couldn't hear it, but
he loves to bark during my interviews.
it's part of the ambient experience. It's all good.
Yeah, he knows. He knows what's going on. Yeah, we didn't talk about dogs, and we didn't talk about sounds that we can't hear, but animals can.
Oh, her battery's out, so she's plugging back in
Okay.
for the laptop. Oh, geez.
Yeah, it's funny because, like I was saying at the beginning, as much as I don't want to say it, but the most important sound in the world is human speech, because otherwise we couldn't have the interview.
Yeah, that's one of those things. Like as nature writers, I'm always trying to sort of spotlight or highlight, you know, the non-human world. But in the end, the writing is for human beings. You know, like we need to understand it. We need to converse and understand the issues and the beauty and the aesthetics that, you know, are filtered always through us. And so it's not really possible to get away from that. Even though sometimes it's good to for people maybe to take a back seat to some of the other happenings and organisms that are happening in the world and doing their own thing. But
When you were talking about organs, I always wondered, like, the stop, it's Vox Humana. I always, when someone first heard that, they must have gone, my God, I can't believe this. But
yeah,
because that was before recordings, you know.
there's all these things like I guess we don't even have to, we haven't talked about recordings yet. It always blows my mind when I'm writing this chapter that the ability to capture a sound like onto something relatively permanent, you know, it's not that old. It's
I
like,
know.
you know, 1860s, and you're like, wow, like through most of human
Yeah, it's
history
like
is
you
just
think of Narcissus and the fact that we didn't have mirrors, and you never really understood what you looked like other than distorted view
which
and
is
a
we
lake.
take for granted so many of these things where it's just like, wow, this is oh, there she is.
Hello again.
I'm so sorry. It's like my battery, it was 58%, it just switches off.
Yeah, that happens with my laptop too, and I don't understand why. So unless I'm plugged in, I don't know why that happens. And
I'm
any
so very sorry.
Oh,
That's all
good.
right.
We just paused
Isaac
it.
and I have been having a lovely chat.
Well, I know. And
We were
Sam,
talking about
it's so, yeah, but it's so nice to chat with you. I just want to reflect on that for a
Yes.
moment.
Lovely.
well, the reason why is because, well, we can begin again. Let's see, because my wife is the producer and she gets mad when we lose, and then I have to do the editing. So it went out and we went back at 59 minutes. But I'll say this, I'll say something now, and then we'll move on from there. But it's something about the book and what you just said about me. Okay. So one of the things I thought about when I was reading the book is and I know you appreciate the questions I've been asking, which is wonderful, is because the reason I read the book so closely is because it was so fascinating and it resonated so much with me. So, of course, it was when I was taking English literature in college and I was getting all A's and I was thinking how cool that is. But then I was realizing I was just reading the book. And then if they ask me questions about the book, of course I'll know the answers. And
Very
all my
easy.
friends are reading Cliff Notes. And I said, why don't you just read the book like Tristram Shandy or Finnegan's Wake? And they go, no, because it's so boring and I don't want to read the whole book. And I'm going, no, it's really good. And so, yeah, I graduated with high honors, but there wasn't any reason other than the fact that I actually read the book, which I did here. So I read the book. So the questions I ask are obviously pertinent to the chapters and they remind me. Now, I may forget it tomorrow since I'm 70 years old, but right today, right now, I do in fact remember it.
But I think there is something about this, you said the word resonated with you many times, which
I
is,
know.
a good sound word. But there is something about the subject matter and perhaps the way we're approaching it that piques your curiosity and makes you want to sort of engage with that world in a deeper way. And I think we're both very appreciative. It's one of those things where a good writer friend of mine, of ours, Jean Haglin, and she told me, some sage writerly advice. It's like the best moments as a writer is when you make a breakthrough in your writing and you get an idea down. And the second is when a reader comes up to you and says something nice about your book. Because everything else is ephemeral, everything else comes and goes, but those are the things that should keep you going in a lot of different ways. So
Yeah,
I think we both appreciate
the
it.
resonance is the key. I mean, with sound and with meaning. I mean, if none of the book resonated with me, there would have been no reason to read it, and there would have been no reason to write it, at least for me. And instead, look at how many times I've jumped from subject to subject simply because one word you've said has led me to another part of the book. And then the last thing, for whatever reason, was the idea of dogs and the fact that everybody knows that dogs hear things that we don't. And that reminded me when you talked about hertz and how low it goes, and then the ultrasonic sounds. And then I guess talk a little bit about what you do in the book, but I don't know if there's a chapter associated with it about the animal kingdom and what they're perceiving. Even when dogs go along the street and smell another dog's excrement for minutes to this point, who knows what information they're gaining, and who knows what information the animal kingdom is gaining from being able to hear things we don't.
Yeah. I mean, Michaela mentioned Ed Yong's book, In Immense World. He has, I think at least a chapter of his book is dedicated to his dog and the sense of smell in a dog and how fascinating and rich that world is for a dog. Because we can't really, become a dog, but we can sort of peek into a little bit of the insight on what that particular sense means to a dog compared to us, which are, we're very good visually, but our noses are nowhere near as complex as a dog. So in the world of sound, it's like I think, my background's in sort of natural history. So my natural inclination is to explore the world in a non-human way, on sounds. I think the first chapter I started writing was the one on really loud fishes, like that are like just keeping people up at night. And it's like that is an interesting approach or a dip into this world, I guess. It's because it's such an unexpected. Everybody, thinks about birds, obviously, and we do have a chapter on birds in the book. But I think we both wanted something a little bit more interesting and unusual, and so exploring the world of sound through the senses of various different creatures and our relationship with them as well is really interesting. Some of them are quite invisible to us, like, the world of moths and bats that we wrote about, where, there's this evolutionary arms race between being detected and detecting food basically, and the two sort of evolving different techniques to find and evade each other is fascinating because it's been going on for 50 million years. And then there's also, chapters in that really sort of connect with the human element where, like these creatures that make sound, like the cicada, become very important and sort of significant symbolically, physically for human beings. Like people are inspired by the natural world all the time. They draw their inspiration from these creatures that are so loud, in the billions, that become a force of nature, literally. And it's sort of the essence of the season. What does that mean to people? How do they relate to that and get inspired by it? So it's interesting how, the sense of sound detected by creatures influence our own shaping of it as well. So I think that was a more interesting thing for me, like to acknowledge these creatures on their own level in terms of, like they can detect sounds and emit sounds that we have no idea was going on. And also to relate some of them, at least some of them, to us and our sort of understanding and our joy at discovering their worlds too. The scientists' finding of how narwhals can focus their sonar like a flashlight. Like that's amazing. It's amazing for the narwhal, I'm sure, because that's how they need to get around. But it's amazing for us to be able
It's
to
a,
discover that.
yeah, it reminds me so much of that, which was an excellent chapter about bats. Not only their ability to detect prey, but the prey's ability to stop them from detecting them. But the cicada, um, what's interesting to me is it's almost like their death rattle. I mean, it's the last thing they do.
Yeah,
Reminds
yeah.
me of salmon swimming upstream and
Mhm.
they don't eat. And you've seen the videos of them climbing the locks or
Sure.
whatever the steps are. And then they get to the top. And the last thing they can possibly do is what
Mhm.
we're all designed to do, which is to continue our existence as a
Mhm.
race or a species. And yeah, the cicadas, it's like, okay, we've done everything we can do. Now we'll find somebody to
Yeah.
whatever, and then that's it. We're
I,
done.
I find it fascinating that they basically use their entire body. Their entire body is the instrument, which is like a really fascinating thing to think about. Like this is the final curtain call, I guess, for them, and they're playing literally their bodies out, their soul out in terms of just in hopes of attracting somebody out there. And everybody's doing it too, which is like also a fascinating thing.
True. The other one is the birds, especially in South and Central America, that the sounds they make with their tails sound like, I don't know what you said, like clicking on a typewriter, or what are the other analogies you gave?
I think there's one that sounds like a futuristic hover car. Like it's like these really weird, like they're not natural sounds at all, but they somehow generate them through, sometimes through the syrinx, which is like a voice producing organ in birds, and sometimes not at all. It's usually with their feathers and their wings and stuff. So it's and the aesthetics of the sound, we think bird sounds are beautiful and attractive to us, but like a lot of them are not. Like some of them sound like there's like one bird, the white bellbird. It seems like it's just screaming at its mate, like at 120 decibels, and it's like, how is this attractive in any way? But it works for the species. And
Yeah.
it's just a reminder that, bird calls are generally not intended for us. We're not the primary audience for
No,
them.
there's this new thing, and I know someone like this. When you're dealing with a narcissist or a megalomaniac and they're yelling and yelling at you, there's this new technique called the gray rock technique. And what you
Oh.
do is you just don't respond. You just stand there, and maybe once in a while you go, okay, uh-huh. It drives them crazy because
No
there's
response.
no response, and that's what they thrive off of. And that's of no moment with regard to this. But one of the things, I guess, in conclusion to the interview is, let me look at the last sentence. The last sentence is, there's an undercurrent throughout the book that you're really upset about what we've done to the world and what may happen because of that. And then the last sentence says, because you're talking about Carl Sagan a lot, which is one of my heroes, and the fact that his laugh is on the
Yeah,
record.
love that
But you
quote.
say such sentiment might save and or outlast us in the end? And what do you think? I ask this of a lot of people who write about climate change or AI, and I always ask them this question, and they never really give me a good answer. So the question in conclusion, and Michaela has to answer it too, is, are you optimistic? Are you cautiously optimistic? Are you pessimistic? Are you fatalist about what we're doing? What the human race is doing?
Do you want to take that one first, or should I?
You go first.
I think, you know, throughout the book, it is a book that has some cautionary tales. I mean, of, you know, like we talk about sound pollution, we talk about, you know, like there not being perhaps a savior outside of ourselves to break us out of the predicament we find ourselves in. So there's an element of that sort of running through, you know, like with the cryosphere as well, you know, this idea of an ominous message or portent. But at the same time, it's like it's also, you know, this is an exploration of sound and the stories behind sounds and all various facets. I don't think it's necessarily, I mean, the question about whether I'm pessimistic or optimistic, um, you know, there are days where I can be one thing or the other. I think we all are. You know, we're not strictly one thing or the other. I think on a day where I'm able to sort of think deeper about the future and work towards something, I think it's almost a moot question. Um, and whether we're able to do the things that we do, you know, we as writers, we work creatively to find the stories, to find the words, to tell certain elements of reality and bring that out to the world for a reader in hopefully a new and interesting way. And if we can do that, that's great. That's the joy that we have to do. Um, and also, you know, like sometimes I get, you know, if I get into a cycle of despair, then it's like, what good is that either? You know, like I think it's one of those things where uh, I forgot. I just recently read this. It was through Rebecca Solnit, which we've both been reading. Um, the book, I forgot what it is now, like the name of it. It's Hope is an Uneven Road. I have to look it up.
What's her last name so I can find the book?
Rebecca Solnit, Solnit, and I have it over there.
Okay. Well, you would agree though that we are at an inflection point.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, this is something, as you know, my background's in environmental science, environmental education. I have been sort of trying to figure this out or trying to work it out in my brain for decades. And this idea of, I think we're at an inflection point, and obviously, you know, we're dealing with things that are very complex and you know, trending in a way that we wish would not trend in this particular way. But I think hope, she says, or she paraphrases, hope is a discipline, and it's not something that is something that you just do passively. You know, if you're optimistic, it shouldn't be a, oh well, I'm pessimist or I'm optimistic and then that's it. It should be something you are working towards building more optimism for and more hope for in your daily practice, in your creative practice, in community wise, and on a global level. I think we can all do that. And it's something that it's something I hold on to. And I think I'm gonna leave it there.
That's a good way to conclude your part. I do think it's hard work. I mean, I don't know if I'm kind of lazy, and it's hard work to do that. And you have to be devoted to it. What do you think, Michaela? Do you think we are, and I hate to say it this way, do you think we're like in the end times, or do you think, especially me being in America and you being in Germany, it's a complete different outlook? I mean, because our country has never ever been like this, so it's hard not to be pessimistic. You know, we've had a good run, we have a good constitution. How long it's going to last, I don't know. But how do you feel, because you have a different worldview than me?
Well, because we've gone through fascism.
Yeah.
No, I mean, one thing is, as you know, we're nature writers, and as a nature writer, you always try and give your voice to those who are not heard in all this conundrum and all this noise. But you know, we always call this the time of the Anthropocene, the human-made era. But recently, I call it to myself, I say it's the time of the everything change, because it seems really right now everything we know and have trusted and have built on, you know, belief in science, looking out for each other, all this, everything is so changing. And so maybe to go back to sound, we talked about it briefly before. Sound is a mechanical thing that happens inside our ear. And there's this guy Swedenborg, who lived in the 18th century, and his ear bone is exhibited in London, and we went there the other day. And there's a story attached to the ear bone, which is that the Tibetans, when someone died, they say sound is the last sense that leaves your body because it is mechanical. Even after your body has shut down, you can still, this bone is still vibrating in your ear. So Tibetan monks, after someone dies, they will sing to this person to guide this person through the afterlife when you come to this place where nothing makes sense anymore, where you're so overwhelmed of being, you know, in this beyond life in this place. They guide you with sound. And I feel this is such a humane way to give care, to give your love to someone who's not here anymore, but to go beyond, to help that person. There's nothing, why would you help a dead person to find their way in the afterlife? Why would you do it? But I think this is what we need to do these days. We need to be there for each other in the, you know, in the most, you know, seemingly absurd ways, but we really have to reach out and hold on to our most basic human understanding of being here together because we are here together. And yeah, that's how I feel as a writer. That's my job.
That's an excellent coda to the interview and the book, because you brought it back to sound. And I agree with what you're saying about singing to the dead, because, well, one, there's no downside. And two,
Yeah.
may very well have an excellent upside. And maybe you can equate that analogy to the entire world itself. You know, even if we go down swinging, it would be good if we remember who we are and we go down knowing who we were in our best times. So thank both of you. I thank both of you for being here and for writing the book. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I really enjoyed speaking to both of you today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Lovely conversation.
I think
Yeah.
so too. Well, hopefully we'll talk again soon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
So long.